There for Democratic contender Barack Obama there in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Meantime, on the right-hand side of your screen, right outside the Lorraine Motel where the assassination took place, the Republican presumptive nominee, John McCain, speaking now. Let's listen in.
The terms applied to men and women of conscience who will not endure cruelty nor abide justice. We hear them. We hear them to this day in Darfur, Zimbabwe, Burma, Tibet, Iran, and other lands, directed at every brave soul who dares to disturb the peace of tyrants. My friends, sometimes the most radical thing is to be confronted with our own standards, to be asked simply that we live up to the principles we profess. Even in the most idealistic of nations, we don't always take kindly to being reminded of what more we can do, or how much better we can be, or who else can be induced in the promise of America included. We can be slow as well to give greatness its due. A mistake I myself made long ago. When I voted against a federal holiday in memory of Dr. King. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong and eventually realized that in time to give full support for a state holiday in my home state of Arizona. I'd remind you that we can all be a little late sometimes in doing the right thing. And Dr. King understood this about his fellow Americans. But he knew as well in the long term, confidence in the reasonability and good heart of America is always well placed. And always that was his method in word and action to remind us of who we are and what we believe. His arguments were unanswerable and they were familiar. The case always resting on the writings of the founders, the teachings of the prophets, and the word of the Lord. Perhaps with more charity than was always deserved, he often reminded us that there was moral badness and there was moral blindness, and they were not the same. It was this spirit that turned hatred into forgiveness, anger into conviction, and a bitter life into a great one. He loved and honored his country even when the feeling was unreturned, and counseled others to do the same. He gave his fellow countrymen and his fellow Christians the benefit of the doubt, believing as he wrote that returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Only light can do that. I remember first learning what had happened here on the 4th of April, 1968, feeling just as everyone else did back home, only perhaps even more uncertain and alarmed for my country in the darkness that was then enclosed around me and my fellow captives. In our circumstances at the time, good news from America was hard to come by. But the bad news was a different matter, and each new report of violence, rioting, and other tribulations in America was delivered with
Memphis. Soledad, good to see you. Before we get to your special this afternoon, give us a bit of a scene setter there. Quite a lot going on behind you. We heard from John McCain just moments ago.
In a word, Tony, rain is probably the best way to do a scene setter. You know, what's interesting, Fred was talking about the reaction when John McCain said, I was wrong. There was a little bit of heckling from the crowd when he was talking about the fact that he did not support the Martin Luther King holiday. But we got some videotape when Senator McCain came out on the balcony. He's sort of given a tour, an impromptu tour by Beverly Robertson, the museum director. You can see him right there, and he has a slew of people with him who are not in that shot, some press and some aides, etc. And there were some cheers from the crowd when he came down the steps to begin his address, but also, I have to tell you, some loud boos as well. it was interesting to hear. But he's still talking and shaking hands in the downpour, and it has been a steady rain. People have come, of course, Tony, to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And the wreath that you can see in that shot with Senator McCain and Beverly Robertson exactly marks the spot where Martin Luther King was shot down by an assassin's bullet. James Earl Ray, as you well know, convicted, captured, spent his life in prison for the crime. Today, you can hear it behind a series of meetings and speeches and forums all around the city. This is the National Civil Rights Museum where we are now and where John McCain is standing in that crowd of people. It's really, from our perspective, a sea of umbrellas in this downpour, Tony. And this museum, of course, was the original Lorraine Motel. They converted it over to be the National Civil Rights Museum. We've got more speeches starting behind us. They kept the museum intact, and it's been a remarkable, remarkable experience to walk through what is truly an incredible museum, to see the bulk of evidence against James Earl Ray and to find out about Dr. King's final days.
I think you just touched on my next question. What has it been like for you? I'm thinking back to the special last night as well, to trace the steps of this murder 40 years later.
Tony, it's absolutely remarkable, and forgive me while the speakers begin again over my shoulder. You know, what's interesting, one of the most remarkable things for me was to go up on that balcony where you saw John McCain just a minute ago. They've had to cut away the cement because the blood stain was so intense. They could not get it out. And when you stand up there, I mean, it does send chills up your spine. At the same time, to walk around Memphis and meet people who are incredibly friendly, but who've been really defined by what happened here. I mean, the city of Memphis struggled very hard after the assassination of Dr. King because nobody really wanted to invest here, while other cities, southern cities like Atlanta, were booming. Memphis was not. In fact, this motel had gone into foreclosure. It's how they were able to get it inexpensively and then turn it into a civil rights museum. And this motel was basically a motel where prostitutes were working out of. And people thought, well, do we want that to be the legacy of where Dr. King was assassinated, something that's fallen apart? So they stepped in and created this. It's been a remarkable experience.
Wow.
You know, I'm not on the payroll for the museum, but I'll tell you, it's a beautiful